So, welcome to our post-debate. Holy shit, was that a total shit show? I don't know where I, I I don't know where to go with this other than that. This was actually worse than I had thought, and I know from the beginning I said no drinking, but I got to tell you about 3 minutes in, I'm reaching for the booze. Didn't have any, but wow, just crazy. So for the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to kick around what little came out of this other than scorched earth and a show of lack of preparedness by Trump. We've got Raw Story reporter Sarah Burris. Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate you taking time for us. Our good friend
Thank
Brett
you.
Pransky, writer and college professor, and of course Beth Baltrazan, a fellow at the Open Markets group. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Let's start with you first, Sarah. Um, Thoughts?
So I feel like Trump going into this, I think his debate strategy was actually this scorched earth kind of thing where it's like, if I can create the biggest blank show and make everybody hate this, then TVs are going to turn off all over the country. And if nobody watches this debate, then nobody's going to see me fall. And so maybe that's what this is. Maybe it's just like, I'm going to make this such a huge, horrible thing that everybody is just like, click and move on. And he wins when that happens because Biden doesn't get his ideas out. Biden doesn't get to talk about his policies and dispel all of the myths and the rumors. And so I feel like in that respect, Trump did succeed because Chris Wallace was the worst moderator in history. Like I just he needs a you know how in radio you have the cough button.
Yeah, yeah.
He needed the like shut up button for Trump.
No, no. As I tweeted out, I think we should have dog collars. They should have been shocking the hell out of him to shut up. Brett, I'm curious your thought, your gut reaction as we've wrapped up this.
Well, before the debate started, I saw a stat that this might be the smallest number of undecideds that we've ever had at this point in an election cycle. That most of us are out there, and we had already made up our minds. So what I was looking at as this whole ridiculous show was going on was who out there is on the fence, and if they are on the fence, is this doing it for them? Now in that effect, I'm not sure that either side really came out on top of that, although there really only was one adult on stage, and that was Joe Biden. But I'm not sure that at the end of this that we really accomplished much other than people turning off their TVs, like Sarah said.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that this swings the pendulum, in any real direction. I think those undecideds, I have no idea who they might be at this point. But I think that this didn't really move the needle all that much. I think that the Trump supporters who were always Trump supporters will be, the same thing that they always were. And the Joe supporters who were Joe supporters will be what they were before. And those folks in the middle, I think that they're just disappointed and disgusted as a whole.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy. Beth Belzan, I'm curious your thoughts, fellow over at the Open Markets Institute. What's your reaction to what we saw?
It seemed very much Trump doing Trump, which is appealing to his base. So I think what everybody else has been saying, does this move the needle? I would guess it really doesn't. I'm in Washington. I care a lot about policy. We didn't really get to talk about policy, but as Brett was saying, there just aren't that many undecided. So maybe people weren't really looking for a policy conversation, and so it's a wash.
Yeah, I brought you on because I was hoping that Trump would talk about how wonderful he did with China and our trade deficits. They didn't really talk about that hardly at all. I mean, brushed past it, where he wanted to take credit for something that he hasn't done. But outside of that, you're right. There's very little policy, not much in my view to go to. We'll get back to that. Joe, welcome. Joe Sandberg, welcome. Curious your thoughts on initial reactions before we jump into some pointed questions.
Yeah, thanks for having me. The first reaction is, as a Californian who's been part of the 1 out of 7 Americans who've been living in poisonous air as a result of all these fires in the last few weeks, I thought one of the worst lies that Trump said was about they're planting 1 billion trees. The Trump administration isn't doing anything on climate except make it worse. They're not planting 1 billion trees. They're not doing anything to face this existential threat that I think has been brought home to so many Americans on the West Coast. We on the West Coast sometimes don't get the attention that our populations deserve from the East Coast media, but we are living climate catastrophe right now in California, Oregon, and Washington. This is probably the worst climate catastrophe in the 21st century in America, as measured by the number of people who are being hurt every single day. Literally poisonous air in California, Oregon, and Washington. Millions of people having to evacuate. And we didn't have a single thing by the Trump administration and not a single word by the Trump figurehead tonight at all about this climate crisis. And by contrast, Vice President Biden took it right to him and said, when he sees the climate crisis, he sees an opportunity to create jobs. And so as a Californian, I really heard that major contrast between, on one hand, an incumbent president who's lied at best and at worst has made the climate crisis a lot worse. And then our next president, Joe Biden, who understands that the climate crisis is both a moral and existential threat, as well as the biggest chance we have to build a next wave of green, high-paying jobs.
Yeah, I mean, I look at my reaction to this, was, oh my God, this is just a total shit show. And, globally, I mean, people are looking at this around the world and looking at us going, is this our political system? Is this how chaotic we are? Is this the best we've got to offer? And, I don't think either candidate won or lost. I think, as Brett pointed out, there aren't very many undecideds. I think most people are in their camps, and you got what you wanted tonight on each side. I think the country lost. I think we as a whole, I think we've lost in this.
Yeah, well, I think also, millennials and Gen Z have lost. We're forgetting 60% of the electorate with the way that the mainstream media derisively dismisses these two generations. Meanwhile, these two generations are saddled with trillions of dollars of student debt. They're watching their parents and loved ones die because they're too poor to be able to afford health insurance. They can't start families because they're crippled with debt. They can't buy homes. The millennial and Gen Z generations arguably have it worse than any generation that's preceded them. Let's just really pause on that for a second. In the last 20 years, there have been three major economic crises: the dot-com bust, the housing crisis, and now the COVID crash. So imagine if you're an American who's 38 years old, all you've ever experienced in both Republican and Democratic presidencies is an economy that is flimsy and prone to massive crashes. You have no chance of looking towards retirement, and you really aren't getting on your feet yet. So I think you're right, Rick. The loser is the American people, but especially the loser out of all of this are millennials and Gen Z.
And no safety net to help catch them. And obviously we're going to saddle them with, a lifetime of debt because how dare they want an education. Beth, let me turn to you because, there was the claim there a moment where Trump was trying to claim he brought back 750,000 jobs, that he's the manufacturing president, and that the Obama people did nothing. I'm curious, fact check that a little bit. Did we see an increase of 750,000 manufacturing jobs under Donald Trump before the COVID crisis? Because look, all those have crashed now, but before, is that accurate?
I think people play really fast and loose with these numbers, and the 2017 tax cuts facilitated offshoring. I think that's a huge problem. So you did have some people fact checking on Twitter as we went along. I think people in Ohio feel like they were made promises that weren't kept. You saw a bunch of offshoring to Mexico, even as the new NAFTA was being wrapped up. And I think that's, it's happening in Michigan, it's happening in all sorts of places. So I think the manufacturing promises have not been realized.
Yeah, Brett, you're in Ohio. And I was just through there recently. The Lordstown plant is still shut down. That promise of bringing back the auto industry, that hasn't really happened. And like I said, I drove by that massive plant. It's zeroed out. Curious your thoughts of what things are like there in Ohio.
Well, it's, the national news is correct about, things in Lordstown and so on, but the overall situation in Ohio is pretty dire as well. For example, one of the myths about jobs, because we always hear numbers of I created this many jobs, or I created that many jobs, and so on. We almost never talk about wages. In Ohio, we had our first negative jobs year actually in 2019 before the pandemic. We had a negative jobs year in 2019, first one in the past dozen years, first one since the Great Recession. And on top of that, 1 in 3 jobs in Ohio pays a poverty wage. So, you know, the jobs we do have don't pay very well. So most people, and that's one of the reasons why the unemployment numbers are kind of false too. Of course, everyone's employed. You need 2 or 3 jobs just to get by. And so a lot of these numbers that we use and that the politicians tend to throw around pretty recklessly don't actually describe the situation on the ground.
Yeah,
Well, I want to expand on that point about wages, because people need to understand that what's extreme is not what we're suggesting, that the minimum wage be a living wage. What's extreme is the status quo. And here's why. If the minimum wage had grown at the rate of productivity since 1960, you know what it would be today?
About 23 bucks an hour.
$22.50. $22.50 it would be today. Instead, the federal minimum wage is $7.25. So to your point, people are working 2 and 3 jobs because wages are totally shit. They can't afford life's basic needs on 1 job. And what's extreme is not our calls for a big minimum wage increase. It ought to be $25. $15 is outdated now. What's extreme is that the minimum wage is so crappy. And all Americans know it's embarrassing. It's an insult to people who work hard, get up at 4 a.m., go to a second job before they can say goodbye to their kids. And we have to rectify the fact that our wages are crap.
That's an excellent point. Well, let's reach out to our millennial, representative millennial, our good friend Sarah, reporter over at Raw Burst, because Raw Story, you're actually living through this. I mean, your generation, you're getting screwed over too. You know, anything in this debate that spoke to you and your generation?
Yeah, I was just thinking about what John was saying. Like, I graduated into from college into that horrible economy, and then I just got out of debt. I think I have $1,000 left on my credit card, and honestly, the only reason that I am able to get out of debt now, and I think the only reason I will have any kind of retirement whatsoever, is because my grandfather just passed away, and so I would have been out of debt sooner, but I had to end up paying for his assisted living because he didn't have any retirement, because he was born in a house with a dirt floor. And so this is like, it's exactly like what you were describing. It's just constant where, you know, I just feel like I finally could catch my breath for a minute, and then all of a sudden it got bad again. I have a 401k for the first time in my life, and I lost, you know, what little I had whenever it took a dive. And so now it's just like, okay, well, I inherited this house from my grandpa. It's not paid off, but maybe this will be my retirement, because then I'll be in a position where, you know, I don't have a house payment, right? Like, these are the things I have to think about. And I'm not even 40 yet. And I'm terrified. How the hell am I going to make it? What's going to happen if my parents get sick? Like, if something happens to my mom and I have to start, you know, taking care of her, how am I going to make that happen?
Yeah,
and so I know that I'm not alone in this. And I know that, like, and you're talking about the climate change issue. Like, I'm trying to figure out, like, how can one day I afford some solar panels so that when I'm older, I can be able to afford air conditioning, right? Like, little things like this where I'm planning 20, 30 years ahead, because I don't have the luxury of not doing that.
Right. Which is
Really
why
sorry
I thought.
my grandfather passed away, by the way.
Yeah.
My grandfather was my favorite human, and I think about him every day. So I'm really sorry for your loss.
Yeah, I have his thumbprint on a necklace around me, and so I've just been kind of like, you know, every couple of minutes, like, I hang on to this and I think about, because he was this great, like, super Christian liberal, right? Like, he talked all about the greater good and doing all of the right things to help each other, and I feel like that is the kinds of sentiment that came through with Joe Biden, and it's one of the reasons that I really connect with him, because he has that sense of goodness and care. And I feel like you kind of saw that tonight with the contrast of this anger and this just, like, you know, constant rage from Trump, and this steady, calm Joe Biden, who you could tell he probably wanted to come across the podium at Trump, but it was just like, no, like, let's have a serious conversation. And when Chris Wallace couldn't keep it together, Biden just turned straight to the camera and was like, all right, y'all, like, this is what's really going on. And I appreciated that, because it was just like, we're going to bypass all of the BS, and we're going to talk about what everybody's really facing right now.
No, that was an excellent
I
point.
think that's why Biden's going to win, Rick. I think Biden's going to win because this is a moment where America is suffering and hurting like never before, truly like never before. And in Joe Biden, whatever you think of his policies, he is one of the most authentically empathetic persons on the face of the planet. And maybe that's exactly the kind of president we need now at a moment when the nation is hurting so bad, is someone of true, deep, and profound empathy.
No, I agree with you.
Someone who cares about your lives and making them better. Like, how much is that to ask?
No, and I think that came through, Brett, I'd like to get your thoughts on this. I think that came through as they were talking about healthcare, because, the reality is, Trump doesn't have a plan. He's shown us time and time again, there's no plan other than there's no plan. So I'm curious, when you heard, Joe talking about that, his healthcare and the fact that, 7 million people have gotten the coronavirus and that people are going to need care. Did that resonate at all with you?
Well, it did. I mean, I do believe Joe Biden left the stage tonight with his integrity intact, which is good, and which can be difficult when he's just thundering away like that. But when it came right down to it, I kept looking at it through the prism of someone who's in a situation like mine, or a situation like many of us out there. I now run a school inside my house during the day. I have a second job as a teacher, and I love it. It's great. And then I try to do my own work, and my wife is trying to juggle all these different things. And we're no different from anybody else. We're all struggling in ways we have never struggled before. These struggles are unique, they are new, and they have all come under Donald Trump's watch. And so people are watching this debate looking for, how are we going to get out of this? How are we going to make things better? And while the angry Trump might make some people feel good emotionally because they think he's a tough guy, I can't see anyone who thinks, you know what? I heard from the president tonight how my family is going to get better. I don't think anyone heard that. So while in the moment there might be some pom-pom waving from the far right about what a tough guy he is, anyone who's looking for actual solutions tonight was listening to Joe Biden.
No, you're absolutely right. And the thing is, to highlight your point, I mean, most people are listening to Trump talk about, how great everything is and what a wonderful job he's done. And they're going, I'm not seeing it. So Beth, I'm curious your thoughts on, Trump was talking about, we're going to re-import, prescription drugs. We're going to save 90% and it's going to be the greatest thing ever. Any reality in that? Is that a possibility?
He's had, excuse me, he's had 4 years to execute a lot of the plans that he was talking about. And it was House Democrats who got some of the pharmaceutical monopoly provisions out of the new NAFTA. That was part of what Pelosi negotiated. So I just have a hard time believing that even as he's talking about Pfizer and all these other companies and singing their praises on the vaccine, these are the companies that have monopoly power over these drugs. So I would need some real evidence to believe that there is going to be a cheaper method of making drugs that will be made available to Americans.
Yeah, because, the question I come up with is, if we do get this vaccine, and I'm hoping it comes very soon, who's going to pay for it? Are we going to force families to dig into their pockets to pay for it? Because I'm getting reports from friends who have had their kids tested for the coronavirus, having their insurance deny it because they don't have enough information, or whatever reason they can come up with. And it just seems to me that the current system is just not working for average everyday working people.
I completely agree. And I think it was right when Biden was saying, you've had 4 years. For 4 years, you've been telling us you had a better plan that was going to be better for everyone. We haven't seen it. You can't keep promising that down the road. And I think it does tarnish all the other promises that get made along with it. Like, we're going to fix the prescription drug problem, et cetera, because he's not done anything to back it up in the 4 years he's had.
So Wallace did hit on the tax issue. Donald Trump says he's paid millions of dollars in taxes. Curious if you agree with his answer?
What a fraud. What an outright lie. And let's just be upfront. Like, all of us here probably pay way more taxes than Donald Trump does. But at the very least, Biden sort of explains, he's using loopholes that we have in place because of, sketchy leaders who give deals to their buddies. And it's like, if you want to change something, then again, like, this goes back to the election. You want to change something, then you're going to have to get to the polls.
Yeah. Do you
And-
find it interesting that, he went after Biden, Trump went after Biden over that issue, saying, well, you guys gave all this stuff away, when Trump was the guy who rammed through the last tax heist, which did nothing to undo that. In fact, in many cases, made things much, much worse, and created a bigger bubble at the top than there had been before.
I mean, I'm not surprised that Trump would say something like that, because he has absolutely no shame. I was surprised that he actually had his wits about him and could say something like that. He knew enough about that. It's like a debate prep question that he actually remembered, because it seems like the entire debate was just him rattling off random things, and half of the stuff didn't make sense. And it was just basically what we talked about before. It was going to be just a complete ramble fest. And that was the one thing where he actually sounded like he had a cohesive sentence to say. So
Yeah.
at the very least, he had his one moment of being able to talk about a policy issue that he could speak on for a hot minute.
Yeah. Joe
Rick,
Sandberg.
I want to say, I think you could distill the debate into the question that Chris Wallace asked about comparing the record and the alternative. And President Reagan posed the question himself when he was running for re-election in 1984. It worked for him. It's not going to work well for Donald Trump, which is, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And whether or not you like Donald Trump as a human being, there's a clear answer to the question of whether you're better off than you were 4 years ago. No, we're poorer, we're less healthy, we're more violent and divided. The country is way, way worse off than it was 4 years ago. And that's ultimately why Donald Trump's going to be a one-term president.
Beth, I'm curious your thoughts. Anything you thought Trump did well in tonight's debate? I mean, obviously he didn't prepare, and we were told he wasn't going to prepare. He was lowering the bar all along. Did you see anything that he did? You go, yeah, he did something right? Anything?
I think if you're a Trumper, he did. But I think this was to Sarah's point, that it was to some extent tactical. He just did everything he could to prevent Biden from being able to articulate what he wanted to say. And Biden had things that he wanted to say, and sort of the point about millennials and Gen Z and talking about the K-shaped recovery and how all the money is going to the top. Those are really important conversations that we should have been able to have, that we weren't able to have because Trump had sort of a few buzzwords he was going to get out. Most seem to involve Hunter Biden. So that, I think, if you have to give him credit for something, I guess it's for disrupting the entire purpose of the event.
Yeah, and I think that's, in my view, that's the only thing that he could have done in this, because his record's terrible. The last 4 years of the record that he has the run on has been terrible. His reactions have been bad. It's all been chaotic, and I a lot of people that I talk to just want the pain to stop. And I know here in Pennsylvania, a lot of people are just like, I voted for him. I just want the chaos to stop. And Brett, I got to imagine it's the same way in your state of Ohio, where, Ohio went for Trump. I got to imagine they just want the pain to stop.
It really is the same way around here. I mean, again, I know that signs don't vote, and that's what you hear from most parties. But the Trump support out here, and I live in a fairly rural area. The Trump support out here, it's still there. You can still see, a few of the flags flying and things like, but it's nothing like it was in 2016. And I can't tell you the number of conversations I've had, with former Trump voters who, they whisper when they tell me how they voted in 2016. I mean, Ohio is a swing state again, and that's great, because if Ohio turns blue, that's it. It's over. There's no path to victory for Donald Trump if we go blue. And we're going to go blue. So, I don't want to call things too early or be too overconfident. I want to make sure everybody gets to the polls and nobody stays home. But we're going to end it right here on election night in Ohio by calling it for Joe Biden.
I hope you're right. There were some really key moments, I thought, that, little one-liners that I thought Joe Biden got in that I wanted to get some response to. The fact that Joe Biden, right to Trump's face, said he's a racist. Anybody else surprised by that?
I think it's exactly what we should do. I mean, you notice that he was asked point blank to condemn white supremacy tonight, and he pulled a Helsinki. I mean, he didn't do it. He would not. In fact, he said some really strange things. I saw a number of tweets about telling the Proud Boys to stand by. I don't even know what that means, but it doesn't sound good. So, I mean, it could just be a gaffe. It could be that he meant to say something else, but it didn't sound very good, and it surely wasn't a condemnation, which is exactly what it should have been.
Sarah, your thoughts?
Yeah, spot on. My favorite was when finally Biden said what everybody on the internet was saying the whole damn time, which was "shut up." Like, for the love of God, just shut up. And that was just like, Biden channeling the rest of the country, just being like, yes, please be quiet. Can we have an adult conversation with, everybody in the country finally sitting down and talking about issues? So that and the shushing and like all of those, and that those are not planned, right? Like nobody plans that in debate prep. And so Biden just like off the cuff, saying that stuff is just very satisfying personally.
Yeah, for me, I would have added the F word in the middle of there. Just shut
Right.
the fuck up already, please. I don't know where else to go with that. And I know a lot of people are going to beat up on Chris Wallace, and I'm not a fan of Chris Wallace by any stretch of the imagination. But there was no controlling Trump because he can't control himself. Short of Wallace blurting that out, anything else Wallace could have done? Do you think?
The mic button, I'm telling you.
Do they have that? I don't know that they had that.
They didn't, but they should.
But they absolutely
They
should.
will next time.
I think you got to put them in separate boxes, game shows.
Or
Beth,
penalize them. Yeah, like some kind of like hockey with the penalty box, where if you interrupt, then your opponent gets that extra time.
yeah, it's crazy. I'm curious your thoughts, Beth. Anything that grabbed you? Anything that caught your attention?
I think Biden was sort of caught between trying to be presidential, and he knows what that means. But in his heart, he's also capable of being a brawler. And I liked it when he actually went back to the same kind of Biden that we saw when he discombobulated Paul Ryan in the debates all those years ago. And I hope that after this one, he realizes that that is a really good strategy for him. Also, he really upset Trump when he said he wasn't smart. So I hope somebody's filing that away, sort of flip the tables a little bit.
You're absolutely right. But Brett, I want to go to you. Donald Trump, he's taking credit for bringing back football. We've got football because of Donald Trump.
Oh, don't even start. I tell you, we don't have football because of Donald Trump. All right, we have football because universities are doing everything they can to keep players safe, and they're doing things that the Trump CDC, would have them do, but the Trump administration would not. So I don't think that the fact that we have the football that we have has anything at all to do with Donald Trump.
Yeah. So I was hoping we would have policy discussions. I was hoping there was going to be something, which is why I chose each one of you, because each one of you really has a particular area of expertise, I think. So since we didn't get it in policy from the debate, I'd like to kind of, in this section, just go into what you would have liked to have heard. And I know, Joe, you're one of the guys who's pushing for a higher minimum wage. I'm somebody who's pushing for stronger labor regulations and allowing people to collectively bargain. What would you have liked to have heard more of tonight out of this debate?
Well, I would have liked to have heard Vice President Biden say this directly to the American people. Donald Trump has cut your wages, and when I'm president, I'm going to raise them. And then expand into what exactly that means. And what I would, of course, have loved to have heard is how he's going to make the minimum wage into a living wage, do a job guarantee so that everyone who wants to work can, and massively expand the earned income tax credit. I think that you can really boil down the contrast between Trump and Biden into that line. Your wages have been cut by Trump. Under Biden, they'll go up. That's what I would have liked to have heard more of.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I wish they would have brought up the whole immunity shield, that because of the COVID crisis, what McConnell and the Republicans want to saddle us with. Beth, I want to get your thoughts. As someone who's a trade expert, was there anything that you would have wanted to hear from Joe Biden? Maybe that the next debate, if there is another debate, maybe something we could focus on in the next debate about trade?
Biden can own the China issue, and I think he has to be aggressive about it, and I think he has to actually talk about things like labor and climate. Trump's China's strategy has been focused on intellectual property and foreign investment, which if you build that up in China, you're facilitating offshoring. Biden needs to say our relationship with China is actually about fair competition for workers, respecting the environment, look at everything that's going on with forced labor. I think Biden can be very aggressive on that and talk about Chinese industrial policies that the Trump administration so far hasn't been able to address. So I think there's a lot of room for Biden to go on offense on that issue, and I'm hoping he does that the next time.
No, I talk to a lot of Trumpers, and they think Donald Trump's just been a god on this issue because he's talked tough. And I said, we've gotten a lot of heated rhetoric, and look, I was all in favor of tariffs as part of a global strategy to pull China back into line. I think it's one of the arrows in the quiver, not the only arrow, but one of them. Because we've got to do something with the global trade deficits that are going on. But the Trumpers don't quite get that China has a plan to dominate the world. And I always send them to their 2025 plan where they want to take over aeronautics and pharmaceuticals and robotics. It's no longer about making the cheap plastic crap that we get at Walmart. It's about dominating the 21st century.
That's exactly right. And it is connected to Biden's plans to onshore and diversify supply chains. And that's the connection that I think is really important to make, that Biden's domestic policies are actually going to be reinforced by reforms that are made on the trade side. Those two things are connected. That's good for workers. It's good for the environment. So I hope that Biden will go on offense on that issue and not feel as though Trump's pushing him back on his heels.
I hope so too. Let me go to Sarah, our fake news representative. Did you want to hear anything out of Joe Biden to defend journalism and defend our media at any point, or is it all fake news?
Well, it's funny you mentioned the fake news, because one of the things that really, really hacked me off about this whole thing was that Chris Wallace and Trump both talked about the economy like it was like jobs were coming back and everything is great. And it's like, and it's exactly what Brett was saying. Like, no, it's not. It's really not. And I wish that Biden had kind of fact checked that more and said, no, like we just heard today that Disney is laying off 28,000 people from Disneyland. Now airlines are laying off a whole bunch of people because their stimulus money is running out. And so there are a whole lot of people that are about to get added to that unemployment rate. Yeah. And for everybody else who has to work, 2 jobs, like, this is a big deal. And I wish that, Chris Wallace would have at least had the wherewithal to give us the actual facts on it.
No, and we're going to lose those jobs at a time when, all indications are the coronavirus is going to get worse as we head into October and November. And especially, we look at, I think there's only 10 states that have seen the numbers go down. Everyone else is going up. So we're heading into the worst part of this. Brett, I wanted to get your thoughts because I don't think they hit on education at all during the debate. Any thoughts?
Well, not only do I think they should have spent some time on education, or in even more specifically on debt, on student loan debt would have been a really good subject to talk about. But I also think that while I did see a little bit of this, I would have liked to see Joe Biden use his time a little more to educate the people who were watching. I don't know how many people were watching. I think somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 million people. And I think there was a moment there where Joe Biden could have played the role of president, because there was an opportunity to save lives tonight. There's a whole lot of disinformation about what we should be doing, how we should be behaving. There's a whole lot of people out there who aren't wearing masks that should be. And Joe touched on this a little bit. But what he should have done is tried to connect to people who he knows aren't going to vote for him. He should have taken this moment to be the president of all people and say to the camera, look, whether you're voting for me or whether you're not voting for me, I want to save your life. And this can do that, And I was hoping to see that kind of outreach, and I didn't quite see that much of it, but he did spend a good amount of time talking about the importance of masks and the importance of policies that can save lives. I just think we could have done a little more.
I'm right there with you. Let's wrap this up with your final thought. And, I guess who you thought won, if there's going to be another debate, and a final thought. Let's start with you, Joe. What do you think?
I want to focus on an area that worries me, that we as Democrats need to preempt starting now, which is the narrative that Chris Wallace formed that the economy is in a V-shaped recovery. The narrative that Chris Wallace formed that the economy is recovering faster than anticipated. I think that if the election is won or lost on COVID, Biden's going to win. But to the extent that there's this development of a narrative that the economy is recovering faster than anticipated, which is where the mainstream media is taking it, if that's not checked, turned around, and explicated into the truth that the economy is terrible for almost everyone except billionaires and monopolies, that's an area that worries me a lot for Biden and for Democrats in the fall.
I'm right there with you. Any chance there's going to be another debate on October 15th?
I hope so.
Because I got to tell you, about 20 minutes in, my mind is going, can you imagine 4 hours of this? Let's go to you, Beth. I'm curious. A final thought?
I mean, I think if you're looking for someone, if we all remember what it's like to be presidential, that's exactly what Biden was trying to do. The circumstances were really, really challenging. So I do think it goes, if you're an undecided voter at this point, I would think you walk away if you watched and you stuck with it. I think you end up concluding that it's got to be Biden because Trump's had 4 years to show what he can do. And if you're undecided at this point, it's because you're not satisfied with what he's done.
Yeah, excellent point. For all of the talk of, well, if you were president, Joe, things would be, no, Donald, you were president and all this bad stuff has happened. This is your mess. Sarah, let's get your final thoughts.
I agree with Beth. I think Biden won for exactly that reason. To Brett's point earlier, I think the only undecideds that there really are people who just hate both candidates. And I think this debate basically just confirmed that they still hate both candidates. So I think anybody who is logical is going to look at this and be like, yeah, Biden is the presidential one and Trump is a loose cannon that we can't trust to lead our country.
Yeah, and he came off to me as irrational. I mean, he just couldn't control himself. In fact, at one point, I timed how long Trump actually was quiet. It was 74 seconds. And I'm like, oh, my God, he was actually quiet for 74 seconds. Brett, your last thought?
Well, I do think there's probably going to be another debate. I do believe that the Biden campaign will do everything it can to get some firmer controls on the nonsense and flooding the zone and so on. Because that does play to Trump and Trump's base in a way that nobody really likes and nobody really enjoys. It just manages to annoy everybody. I think the old saying is that they say never wrestle with a pig because you both get dirty and the pig likes it. You know what I mean? That's kind of what we saw tonight.
Yeah.
So I think that there will be some checks on Trump's ability to just kind of interrupt and flood the zone and just crap up the whole event. But without that, short of that, no, I wouldn't see another debate.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, but I appreciate everyone's time. Joe, thank you. Beth, thank you. Sarah, Brett, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
And thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Good stuff. I'd love to hear your thoughts. How did things go for the debate? Did you enjoy the Donald, his little tirades? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will be back. We'll be back again tomorrow.